morning listening to songs like The Times They Are Changing on the radio, on pop radio. This was unheard of. I mean, it was not, you know, Jane meets Ted and they fall in love, or they fall out of love, or boy meets girl, loses girl, etc. This was, you know, come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you don't understand. This was a chance to participate in the making of a new world.
It was almost like a non-ending cycle. Like, you got up on Monday, you went to work, you went all the way up until Wednesday, and then Wednesday you felt a little hope because on Friday you would get paid, and then when you got paid, then you would have some fun, and then Saturday, you know, the fun would start coming down, and you would go to church on Sunday to try to get some rejuvenation, and then it would start all over again.
Lord, I'm full. Lord, I'm 500 miles from my home.
At 27 years old, I lived in a beautiful home with a 3-stall garage, 3 cars in it, a husband that was very handsome, fraternity president. I was skyrocketing in my career. I had an unlimited amount of money to spend for clothing.
I remember sitting in the White House one day and looking out over the South Lawn, the beautiful manicured South Lawn of the White House, and thinking to myself, my dad was right. If you work hard, you can get to the top. Here I am, immigrant's grandson, sitting next to the President of the United States, one of the half-dozen men walking out of his office every day, one of the most powerful men in America.
You have to understand that I was a macho kind of guy. There was nobody that was tougher than me. I had gotten by in Vietnam all my life so far on my own strength, and there was no way that I felt that there was anybody stronger or tougher than me.
You tested positive, Bob. You have AIDS.
Hello, I'm Ralph Martin. Have you ever been back to your old neighborhood and looked at the house you used to live in? If you have, you know the powerful memories it evokes. For some of us, happy memories, memories of family dinners and activities together. For others, not so happy. Maybe difficult relationships, maybe even battlegrounds. But for all of us, the idea of home, a place of love, acceptance, security, is something we long for. And especially those of us in North America who have experienced so many profound changes in our culture and values in the last 30 years. These have really been unsettling times. We're here in New York City, not just because it's where I was born, but because New York is a microcosm of America, of the world. On the one hand, it's a wonderful place, bursting with life and color. On the other hand, someone's murdered here nearly every day. There's a resurgence of racial hatred, an explosion in crime? In this immense city of towering buildings, behind these doors and windows, there's a million stories unfolding. People are suffering. Children are abused. Fathers are dying of cancer. Single mothers are striving to raise their families alone. Daughters are raped. Sons are going to jail for drugs or dying from AIDS or getting sent off to war. I want you to meet some of these people who will tell us their stories, stories about their personal struggles as they search for a place called home. Vietnam was the first big shockwave of the turbulent 60s. The evening news brought war into our living rooms, and many of us didn't know if this war was right or wrong. The country was confused and deeply divided. Some protested, others fought. Of those who fought, 200,000 were wounded or killed. 2,400 are still listed as missing in action, and no one escaped the psychological scars. In 1968, at the age of 22, Tom Stemke was flying helicopter gunships in Vietnam. He had joined the Army after a bitter argument with his father.
I was raised in a small northern Michigan community. My family was a structured Catholic family. Our life revolved around my father, who was a very strict man. He was involved in two businesses that he originated himself. One was an insurance business, one was a nursery business. He grew literally hundreds of thousands of trees. My dad was so strict that he actually didn't really allow us or want us to laugh and carry on when we worked. I tried to always be the hardest worker for my father. He had a 30-man crew. And this particular morning, as I was pruning, I finished my job and went back and tried to help my cousin, who was the slowest worker. We began to laugh about something. My dad didn't appreciate that. I had words with my dad, and I physically encountered my dad, ended up breaking his arm, his hand, and several ribs. It was approximately 5 or 6 months later, after this encounter with my father, that I entered the military service. One day I was sitting in San Francisco, and the next day I was in Vietnam, a captain, 23 years old, responsible for 130 other men. They looked at me, and we were engaged in battles. We were engaged in a conflict I didn't understand. One day I would see people alive, the next day I would not. These were my friends, men I was responsible for. I said to myself, this is crazy. I should be back farming somewhere. And nevertheless, I had to put on this facade. I had to remain strong because I realized that these men did have to have something themselves to hang on to.
Tom wasn't the only one confused by the events of the war. Most of us were. The moral confusion and uncertainty brought on by Vietnam intensified with the Watergate scandal of 1973. Watergate shook the very foundations of this country.
I regret what happened, what I attempted to do to Dr. Ellsberg. It is wrong whether it is done to him, to me, or to others. And not only is it morally right that I plead to this charge, but I fervently hope that this case will serve to prevent similar abuses in the future.
As special counsel to President Nixon, Charles Colston felt its full impact.
Well, I didn't think I was ever involved in Watergate. As a matter of fact, I left the White House thinking I was clear of it. But then as that scandal began to spread, I realized my own involvement in creating a sort of an atmosphere in the White House that led to a Watergate, my own moral lapses. It caused me to begin to really take a look at myself and what my values were and what motivated me in life. I'd spent 4 years of my life building up this institution called the White House and the presidency and Richard Nixon's administration, and I saw it all crumbling and collapsing, and I realized the vanity of so much of what we do. I also realized that all my life I had sought power and influence and money and success to find security and meaning in life, and I discovered that those things don't give you security and meaning in life. I couldn't get rid of that nagging emptiness inside.
The moral uncertainty caused by Vietnam and Watergate led to a major reassessment of traditional values. Family life was particularly hard hit. From 1965 to 1980, the divorce rate in the United States more than doubled. 1 in every 2 marriages ends in divorce. Kathy Remingers was one of these.
As the oldest of 6 children, I had a lot of caretaking responsibilities, and I always had this dream of this man coming in and just sweeping me off my feet. And he did come along. He was a fraternity president, and he showed me the exciting life. And I saw a lot that I wouldn't have been exposed to if I hadn't met him. And I had to make a choice because there was a struggle going there. I had this background that I was raised with, fundamental values, and another lifestyle that said excitement. And I was curious, and I kept struggling with that until I finally gave up, and I chose this lifestyle. The college party life continued on into our marriage, and it was exciting. We went out dancing, we had boat parties, we had a whole group of friends that had the same exciting lifestyle as ours. We were living in the fast lane, but it lasted too long because I wanted to have children, and my husband didn't. And I became pregnant, and he wanted me to have an abortion. Because I wanted to hang on to his love, I agreed to his wishes. I had the abortion, and then a short time later I became pregnant again and had another abortion. And I started feeling terribly lonely inside, as if I had been abandoned in this marriage.
In the last 25 years, the family structure has changed for millions of Americans. Increasingly, a single parent heads the family, usually a single mother. For Katrina Gainey, raised by a single parent in the black community, it was a struggle to find hope in the midst of hopelessness.
I was the youngest of 3 girls and raised by my mother, who's from the Deep South. I used to sleep in the same bedroom with my mother. And I remember that she had this little ritual where she used to braid our hair, and she would lay out our clothes at night so that when she got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, she would go to work, and then she would call us back at 7 o'clock in the morning and say, you all are up yet, and make sure you brush your teeth and everything like that. And it was a struggle for me as a little girl because I really cared for my mother a lot, and I didn't understand why my mother had to work so hard. When my father would come to visit me, I would feel as if, because he never lived with us, and when he would come to visit us on Saturday mornings, it was my middle sister, my mother, and I always felt like, okay, here's some love right now, this is it, this is what the family, and then he would be gone, and once again, that cycle would always be, and I would always have to deal with that feeling of abandonment. It's always just a little bit love, but it's always out of reach for you. It's never going to be there totally for you, and I always wondered if I had done something to not deserve having that all the time, and that's why I think I struggle so hard to just be loved a lot, and that's a really hard thing just to even reflect on that as a woman, but to be a child to do that, and then growing up in a kind of environment where you saw a lot of hopelessness, it was even harder.
The sexual revolution of the 60s led to a new and horrifying medical battle in the 80s. AIDS has been called the Black Plague of the 20th century. Tragic numbers of men and women are being cut down in the prime of life. Bob Winter had AIDS and recorded his battle for us.
I'm 36 and feeling the consequences of decisions that I made half a lifetime ago. Growing up, I never felt like I fit in. I was the kid with the thick glasses, kind of shy. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old, and my dad moved out of state, so he was never around. It was at boarding school in the 8th grade that I had a homosexual encounter. I remember feeling confused all the time, afraid somebody might find out. By the time I was 18, any self-worth I had was gone. Then, one night a guy invited me to a party where, for the first time, I felt like I belonged. Nobody called me faggot. It felt so good to belong somewhere that I decided to become part of that lifestyle.
And eventually you discovered that with this bar chord, an E chord like this
with a bar laid down became a F chord, and 2 frets up became a G chord, and all the way up here. And if you had stayed with it, you could have done songs like. It didn't take much more than that in the 50s, you know.
Peter, Paul, and Mary began their singing career here in New York City. Their songs gave expression to our hunger for truth and authenticity. For Noah Paul Stookey, personal struggle came with his search for meaning.
For the times they are a-changin'.
I think that the great disillusion that hit at the end of the 60s, brought about by the whether you agree they were brought about by the assassinations or not, caused a lot of people to say, hey, this isn't working, this dream that we had, this hope that we had for love, big L love, taking over the world, this vision of all you need is love, is diffracted, and everybody went their own way. There was a disparity between that which we had hoped for and that which we really were living out. I was disgusted with my fame, and I could not handle it. I was not a benevolent despot. I remember reading in high school, you know, about these dictators who would be very kind to their people. I was not kind. And when people would make special gestures, overtures, not on the basis of who I was as a person, who I understood to be flawed, but on the basis of my fame, and I would start to take advantage of it. Mr. Stookey, you don't have to wait at the line. You can come ahead and go right in. Mr. Stookey, do you want a table? Mr. Stookey, I brought a girl to the party. Would you like to meet her? I began to believe essentially began to believe my own press clippings. And I was sick with it.
I can identify with the gap that Noel spoke about between his ideals and how he actually lived. During that same period, I was also struggling with the same gap. I was born and raised in a good Catholic family and had a close relationship with God as a child. But church membership became less meaningful as I grew older. I went off to college at Notre Dame and studied philosophy and found myself caught in a war of ideas. As far as I could see, Christianity seemed to be irrelevant. Maybe God does exist, I thought, but he sure didn't seem to make a practical difference in the lives of the people I knew. Yet I wasn't very encouraged by what I saw in myself and others who were searching for truth and justice apart from God. I remember participating in a civil rights demonstration and joining others in attacking the car of a politician visiting Notre Dame that we thought had racist views. It was ugly. We pounded and rocked the car and even took the sticks holding our picket signs and pushed them through the windows, and we may have hit them. When I was honest enough to admit it, I wasn't very happy about the lack of peace and justice I felt in my own heart and in the hearts and lives of those I was associated with. We may have told ourselves that God was irrelevant, but boy, we really needed something. And so did Tom Stemke and the others.
Got out of Vietnam, luckily, came back very confused, very much hurt. My heart was hard. I was mistrustful. I didn't like the government. I certainly wanted to be involved in some kind of career that I could work with my hands. I wanted to do something simple, and that's what I did. I went back to the earth. In a period of 10 years, my mistrust, my heart, my confusion led to more and more deterioration in my life. I was running away each day. My relationship with my wife began to go downhill. I didn't want to face up to my father. I didn't know what my father's reaction would be, frankly. Would he be angry that I didn't succeed? I knew it probably wouldn't be good, because it never was. And I said, I'm going to take my life.
It was in the midst of that I went back to Boston to once again be the general counsel of the Raytheon Company. I'd represented Raytheon, one of my clients, before going to the White House, and now I was back. 4 years later, I hadn't seen Tom Phillips, the president of Raytheon, in 4 years. I walked in his office this day in the spring of 1973 while I was feeling this emptiness inside, although I wouldn't show it outside. And Tom was a man much like myself. He'd worked his way up the hard way, started as an engineer at Raytheon, one of 50,000 employees, at age 25, and at age 36, executive vice president, age 40, president. Dynamic, hard-driving guy. Walked in his office this day. He was calm. He was at peace. Seemed like a different person. And I said to him, Tom, you've changed after about 15 minutes of conversation. And he said, yes, I have. I mean, just like that. He said, I've accepted Jesus Christ and committed my life to him. Well, I have to tell you, I took a firm grip on the bottom of the chair. I mean, I thought little old ladies in tennis shoes handing out tracts in street corners talk like that. But this fellow was a scientist and a physicist and a businessman, an engineer, hard-headed, practical, talked about Jesus Christ. I mean, I'd studied about Jesus when I went to Sunday school, ancient historical figure. This man talked about him as if he knew him. I nervously changed the subject.
At 30, I had everything that I was supposed to have to make me happy. A good job, my own house, a 21-year-old lover. But I wasn't satisfied. So I had more lovers, did more drugs, alcohol. I found myself doing things that I never thought I would do. It just destroyed my personality. I became so self-centered and hurt. But I couldn't stop.
When I was 18, my pastor at my church, he got me to teach Bible vacation school at my church. And teaching with me, there was this young woman who came outside of our community to teach with me. And she was this, the way I perceived her at that time, she was this young white woman. The way I perceived her, this young white woman from the suburbs. And so I was going to do any and everything to make it impossible for her to have a good time with me. So I remember that I started joking with her, and I started like really putting her down, like saying, yeah, I bet you play tennis, you know, I bet you have a little dog named Toto, you know. And she would never say anything. She would never rebuff me. She would just smile, you know. And then she would talk about her relationship with God as if God was her friend. And I wasn't used to that, you know. It was always like this was God, and you were down here. And then she started telling me, well, I go to this fellowship on Tuesday nights. Would you like to go with me? I said, you go to church on Sunday and you go on Tuesday too? You crazy. I said, I'm not going to go with you.
It goes down all the time.
Yeah, I know.
Pulling weeds and picking stones. Man is made of dreams and bones.
And I remember giving God an ultimatum. I think God must really enjoy ultimatums. That must be part of the process. You know, he must sit up there with his file card and he go, let's see, what do we got? Here we go, Stookie. Has he gotten to the ultimatum point? No, he hadn't even, no. We'll go on. Because when you give God an ultimatum, what you're doing is you're issuing a challenge that must be scripturally traditional right down through the ages, you know, the very beginning of time. You're wrestling with an angel. You're saying, okay, I want to know if you're really there. Okay, I see all the words. I know the church. As a matter of fact, I found a cassette tape long time later in my car that I made as a songwriter, because, you know, songwriters, pretty soon you get crazed, particularly if you're a successful songwriter, because you realize there's no telling where the next song idea can come from. I'm opening the refrigerator door. Nah, that could be a song. Well, it might be. It could be kind of weird. So I started recording everything, and I found this tape where I'm actually praying, see, but at the time I'm not thinking that I'm praying. At the time I'm actually talking to God. And on this tape I'm saying, okay, look, if you're really there, I want to be on your side. I want to be on the good guys team. But I don't know where it is. I don't know where the good guys are. And a couple of days go by, 3 days go by, I'm out on the road, I'm writing songs, I'm whatever, and we're doing a tour in Texas. And it's halftime. And Peter's going on stage, and he's singing, and I've got my 12-string, and I'm off around the corner tuning, and I come wandering out this doorway, and there's a guy leaning up the wall. Well, there's not supposed to be anybody backstage. There's pretty high security. And I look at him, I says, is there something I can do to help you? And he says, yeah, actually, I'd like to talk to you if I could. And I say, well, I can't right now. This is halftime, wondering how I got here at all. I said, but I'll look for you after the show, and we can have a few words then. He said, okay, he was real nice about it. And sure enough, after the show, there he was. I put my arm around him and said, what is it you want to talk to me about? And he looked at me. He just looked up and with this clear presence said, I want to talk to you about God. Only I knew he wanted to tell me about God. He didn't want to ask me about God. He wanted to tell me about God. And where did he get the authority to do that? How would he know?
So from the time I was 18 until I was 35, I very rarely went to church, maybe Easter, Christmas, occasionally maybe Thanksgiving or something. But there never was a God in my life while I was accumulating this wealth, while I was going up in my career. But inside of me, something was wrong because I just felt terribly lonely. I can remember one night walking around in my home and looking at all the beautiful things and looking outside and seeing the perfectly manicured yard, and everything just looked so wonderful. But then as I got into bed that evening, I just started sobbing and crying. I again felt overwhelmed with this just terrible, terrible loneliness. And I just cried out to God, and I said, God, I don't understand. Will you come and protect me? And will you explain to me, why do I feel this way? The next morning I went to our den where we had an old heavy desk that had been there for years. And for some reason, I decided to move that desk to a different location. So I started taking the drawers out of them one at a time, and I got to the very last drawer, which was a Pendaflex. I took that out, and at the bottom were 2 manila envelopes. And I took them out, and out came pouring love letters and photographs and a list and itemization of women that my husband had associated with, all during our marriage.
And this was during the ugly, dark days of Watergate, when there were camera crews in my doorway every morning when I tried to go to work, and when I was hauled before grand juries and congressional committees. And people in the city of Washington normally could be civil with one another, but they couldn't during this period. There was a poison that infected our country. And all through this time, Tom Phillips was everything Washington wasn't. He was civil and decent and caring and loving. And so finally one night in August of 1973, I just had to go find out what was this business, accepting Jesus Christ. What did it mean? And I spent an evening at his home just outside of Boston, a warm summer's evening. And I said, Tom, you've got to tell me. And he explained to me what had happened in his life. It was a very moving story, and he gave me a wonderful little book entitled Mere Christianity, written by C.S. Lewis. One of the most powerful messages in that wonderful little book is a chapter about pride. The vice that we see in everyone else but never in ourselves. How a proud man is always walking through life looking down on other people and other things, and when you're looking down, you can't see something above yourself immeasurably superior, God. And I realized that I'd gone through life. I mean, it was like a torpedo hitting me amidships. I realized I'd gone through life all those years thinking I was trying to get ahead because I was idealistic about serving my country. I wanted to be the best lawyer in the business. I wanted to make money for my family. But I realized that night for the first time in my life that really what was motivating me was my pride, my desire to prove how good I was. I left his home that night to go off on a vacation on the Maine coast with my wife, and clutching the little book he'd given me, Mere Christianity. I found that night that I couldn't get the car out of the driveway. White House tough guy, toughest of the Nixon tough guys, the newspapers said, the White House hatchet man, the ex-Marine captain. I couldn't drive the car out of the driveway because I was crying too hard, calling out to God, the first honest prayer of my life. I sat in that driveway that night a long time thinking about my life and wanting to know God. If you're real, I want to know you. I want to be clean. I want to be cleansed. I wanted a new life.
As a student, I'd return to the city during semester break and come to museums like the Cloisters. I'd walk through the halls, struck by the artwork. So much of it focused on the highest impact event of world history: the birth, life, death, and resurrection of a person named Jesus. I look out over the city, knowing there were millions of people out there like me, each with their own story, their own hurts and hopes. Wondering what would happen to them all. Wondering what would happen to me. About that time, my roommate at Notre Dame was urging me to go on a weekend retreat. He was so persistent, I finally gave in and agreed to go. I went with a lot of conflicting ideas and an overall skepticism. What I expected to find was a group dynamic situation where people would have a warm experience together and somehow call it God. When I got there, I was really struck as they spoke about Jesus as a person, as if they knew him. This made me uncomfortable. It was just too close and too personal. I preferred to speak of him in a more distant way, as the second person of the Trinity. Yet I was very attracted as they went on to speak about the love of God and the tremendous implications of new life in Jesus. Then they totally ruined it by talking about sin. What they were calling sin, I was talking about as learning experiences. An awful realization began to dawn on me. I had really prided myself on being an honest searcher for truth. I was really beginning to wonder, had I really been honest? Had I really wanted to find the truth? Or had somewhere along the way the search become more important than the finding? If Jesus were real, then a lot of things would have to change in my life. I had to face the question, was Jesus who he said he was? Could this all be true?
Then, one day I found myself in San Francisco General, burning up with a fever in an AIDS ward. I lost 20 pounds in 10 days. I was getting weaker every day. It's a terrible thing to feel your life just slip away. I wanted to stay and live, but I was getting weaker. I didn't want to die.
There's something in most of us that's afraid and angry about death. Dylan Thomas wrote, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." And deep down, that's how we feel. We don't want to die. We don't want to see our loved ones die. 2 of my grandparents are buried here, along with tens of thousands of other husbands and wives and children. So many things that might have been and never were. So many lives cut short. No more smiles or laughter. No more embraces. Life is over. Gone. Buried. Seeing our friends and relatives die, something in us cries out. This shouldn't be. It simply shouldn't be. Oh, that it were different. Oh, that there were a power, a love that was strong enough, real enough, to reverse, to restore what death has destroyed. Is there any real hope of resurrection from the dead? Or will there only be a big chill and a long silence?
In the meantime, my wife began to attend a prayer meeting. This was about 6 months prior to me reaching the bottom of the barrel as I now see it. I made fun of her. I didn't want to go. I didn't understand what she was doing, but nevertheless, the day that I said I was going to commit suicide, I went to the prayer meeting with my wife. They talked about Jesus, they talked about the Holy Spirit, and I said, I think I'm interested in this. I think that I need this, and basically I did need it. I needed to be loved. That very moment, I saw an image, and God blessed me and gave me an image of Jesus hanging on the cross, which overwhelmed me. For the first time in 15 years, I was emotional. I could do nothing but cry out of joy, because as I saw this image in my mind of Jesus hanging on the cross, I began to understand and sense that Jesus died for me. Here I was, Mr. Macho Man, had it all together, and my life was falling apart over a period of 10 years. I had nothing to stand on. I had no claim to fame. It seemed like I had failed in everything. Here he was, Jesus hanging on the cross, and had done that for me. That was the most amazing, profound experience I had had all my life. And I did nothing but cry and receive the love that God wanted to give me at that time.
Later I was remarried and we had 2 little girls, and I started a whole new lifestyle, but a whole new family. But I still had pain and suffering because I had lost a husband. I had given up my career to be an at-home mother. I had lost 2 children to abortion, and I was trying to sort out, who was I? Who am I? What is a normal family supposed to be like? And a neighbor lady that I met in the neighborhood invited me to come to a lecture series. And I went, and they started to talk about Jesus. And in the course of that morning, they sang songs, and they'll never forget, they sang the song, "For those tears I died." I get so emotional because part of the song says, "I felt every teardrop that in darkness you cried," and it was Jesus talking. And I realized that he had never abandoned me, that he had been there with me. All this pain and suffering and loneliness, he had walked by my side the whole time, and I was the one that let him go. But I turned and I reached out to him, and he was there waiting for me.
So I finally said, okay, I'll come with you. I'll come with you on this particular Tuesday night. And I remember I walked into the church, and I did feel something powerful that was coming over me. And I remember that when I walked into the church, I saw people singing Thy Loving Kindness, and which is based on the Psalm. And I remember that I saw them worshiping in a way that I had never seen people worship before. To me, it looked as if they were really, really offering themselves up to God in a sense that it was not out of force. It was not because they were afraid. It was because they did it because they were actually in love with God. And I remember being in the pew and feeling this power coming over me. And then I remember this image of this light. And I remember I heard this voice saying, "Let me in." And I was so overwhelmed by the love that I kept saying, "No, I don't want to let you in." And this voice said, "Let me in," very gently. And I felt for the first time, with all of my insecurities, with all of the doubts that I had, that I was not lovable enough, that there was something that stopped all time, stopped all space, and I really felt as if the Spirit of God said to me, "You are loved. I love you, and you are loved." And I remember that it showered me so much that I started showering my body with my tears. And I started crying, and I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I was actually hurting, because it felt like all the love that I had missed for myself personally as a child was just being taken care of in this one moment, this one space in time. It was like, here. And all I could do was just bask in it, and all I could do was just receive it, and all I could do was just say thank you.
And so I went up to the Maine coast with my wife, Patty, and I took that wonderful little book, Mere Christianity, and I started to go through it. And I took my lawyer's yellow pad, and lawyers are never without that, and made 2 columns. There is a God, there isn't a God. Jesus Christ is God, he isn't God. Went through that book and read those arguments and started to fill in those blanks. Came to the most amazing discovery, Jesus Christ is exactly who he says he is. And I realized then I was faced with a choice. You have to choose either to accept Christ for who he is or to turn away. And I went down and I stood by the sea that I've loved so much all of my life. And I looked out over that water and I called out, I said, Lord Jesus, I want you to come into my life. I accept you. I want you to be the Lord of my life. And that was the moment that I felt this overwhelming assurance. I felt the presence of God in a way that I've never had before in my life. And that was many, many years ago now, 17 years ago, and I know the whole world laughed and scoffed, and I understand that. I would have too if the tables were turned, but I can tell you from that moment to this that I've never doubted the reality of Christ. I'm more certain of him today than I am of my own reality.
So we get back to the motel. First thing he does when we get into the room, he says, I think we should pray. So we hit the floor. And he thanks God for getting him into the concert without a ticket. He thanks God for getting him backstage without a pass. He thanks God for putting a calling on his heart to talk to me. And he says, and now I think Noel wants to talk to you. And I realize that I am in front of my Creator. I'm in front of the God that I have sought so long. And all I managed to get out is, and I realize how much of my life I've tried to ignore God, that I've tried to be God, that I ignored the possibility of having a direct relationship with him. And all I can get out of my mouth is, I'm sorry, before I just totally lose it. And I say, I'm sorry again, and I cry, and I just start crying, and I cry for maybe 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then I just start saying, phew, because everything, all of the tension, everything that I brought to the motel room, everything that I had, all the baggage that I had brought for 30 years, you know, limping around the country, looking for some reason, some justification, some basis to believe, is now culminated. And I'm laying down all my baggage. And I feel brand new. And I know what it means to be reborn. Though I don't have any of the terms, I don't have any of the scriptural basis, I don't know any of the nomenclature, I don't know any of the cliches. But God's going to honor that, as I discover later, because he's going to tell me to avoid those, like the plague. He loves fresh soil, you know. He loves being spoken for the first time.
But somehow, in God's mercy, he reached down into the pit I had dug for myself and showed me that there was a way out. I met some people who had left the lifestyle, and they talked about God's love and forgiveness, that he loved me as his child. But after all I had done, how could he? But then that night in the hospital, God gave me a picture of Jesus lying there inside of me, and I saw the Roman soldiers forcing the thorns on his head, just as my head was throbbing, and I felt him feeling my pain. For the pain didn't go away, but the presence of God was so strong, it no longer mattered.
The writer G.K. Chesterton said that the sign of a healthy mind is knowing when to close it on something solid, like the truth. That was the choice I faced on that weekend. I hesitated because I knew if I admitted that Jesus was the truth, it meant I had to follow him. After a struggle, I confessed my sins of rebellion and pride and arrogance and lack of gratitude towards God and others, and asked for his forgiveness. I committed my life to Jesus and was reconciled with the church. I knew then I had come in contact with the source and sustainer of all human life. I had come home. That was 20 years ago, and it's made all the difference.
One morning, I felt like I should call my father. It was a Sunday morning. I called him. He was in the hospital at that time, and I can remember saying to him, Dad, I love you, and I had decided I would ask his forgiveness. I said, Dad, I love you. Would you forgive me for all the things that I had done against you? And my father said, yes, I forgive you. I've always loved you, and I love you now. And he died an hour later. This very day, this affects me deeply because I realize how important forgiveness is. I basically still have a lot of unanswered questions. But what I've come to realize in my new relationship with Jesus is that Jesus has met me halfway, so to speak. And he says to me, I'm walking with you in this. I'm walking in your doubt. You don't need to know all the answers. All you need to know is that I'm walking with you. What a blessing for me as a father.
For a long time, I always thought I always had my romantic thoughts that I'll find it in a husband. There'll be a man who'll come and love me, and I'll feel loved that way. Or I always had my best friends, you my best friend, and I'll feel loved that way. Or if we could just get out of the inner city and get us a nice home in the suburbs and my mother doesn't have to work as hard, then I'll be loved. But what God gave to me was a gift of not only being loved, but a gift of resurrection, that I didn't have to physically die. I didn't have to wait in the great by and by to feel accepted and loved and resurrected. And I actually knew at that moment in time that I had been walking in a lie, that I believed that death was all around me and there was never ever going to be any life. And from that moment on, I knew that there was always resurrection, not only for me, but for anybody who can just open up the door and just receive it.
So it's next morning and it's bang, 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 bang. Toledo! Wow. Toledo, it's time to get up. Oh, jeez. It's time to get up, right? Well, what happened here last night? And I get dressed. And as I'm walking out of the door of the motel, I look down and I see the Gideon's Bible sitting on the table. And I pause right by the door and I say, wow. I wonder if this will stay with me for the rest of my life. And it has.
Having AIDS is very difficult. I won't pretend it's easy. But the last 4 years, I have been happy for the first time in my life. I like myself. I made a mess of my life when I called the shots. But because of God, I'm not just an ex-gay. I am a new man. The most wonderful thing you can do on this earth is develop a relationship with Jesus. I've come to really know him, to rely on him. And I believe that he's preparing me for eternity.
Our friend Bob has died. But before he died, he confessed his sins and put his faith and trust in Jesus and was reconciled with God, his Father. He came home. And now he's home for all eternity. There was another young man, not unlike Bob perhaps, called the prodigal son. A young man who wasted his life and inheritance and found himself abandoned by his friends with nothing to eat. And finally, he humbled himself and returned to his father's house too. Jesus described it like this. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and told the servants to prepare a feast. The fact that the father saw him a long way off shows that he was looking for his son, hoping against hope that his son would return. Jesus told us about this son to show us the kind of father that God is. Someone watching and waiting and longing for his children to come home.
Only when I finally realized that God, in the person of Jesus Christ, was there for me, and I accepted him into my heart, not understanding this, of course, at the time, but just doing it, I can be the man that I always wanted to be.
The key to life are the words of Jesus. Only he who loses his life for my sake shall find it. And all of us are seeking to find power and meaning through ourselves, and you never get there. It's only when you surrender it all and look for God's power and not your own that you find any meaning in life.
I know the rest of my life I'm going to have struggles. I may feel lonely again. I may feel abandoned. Life is all full of trials and tests. But now I have a person that is a real person. To me, I might not see God, but he is a real person to me, a friend.
I know that in my life, that God has instilled in me a sense of hope, that in the midst of my struggles, in the midst of this process, that there's an anchor now that I hold on to, and there's a big difference now as opposed to what I had before.
In my most anxious moments, it is my brother. It is he that I can turn to. It is the name that defeats all others. It is the name that provides the anchor for my life.
The way to my father's house when I was just a boy.
All through our time together, there's been another voice speaking. Perhaps you haven't clearly recognized it yet, but now's the time. Through Chuck and Tom and Katrina and Bob and Kathy and Noel, through the faces and sounds of the city, the artwork of the cloisters, a voice is speaking through the centuries, and it's speaking to you. It's the voice of Jesus, and he's speaking to you. Here I stand, knocking at the door. If anyone open his heart, I will enter his house and have supper with him, and he with me. Open your heart and mind to Jesus now. Put your faith and trust in him. And perhaps for the first time in your life, find yourself at home. I'll be back in a minute.
On the way to my father's house. The way to my father's house at the age of 29 led over a mountain that I would seldom climb, except in times of great despair, when I'd be looking everywhere. And then one morning he was there on the way to my father's house. And glory, what a refreshing story. I was so blind before he opened my eyes, restoring me to the way to my father's house at the age of 31 was a ride on a rainbow. My new life had begun. And every evening I could look through the pages of his book and recognize the paths I took on the way, on the way. I go to my father's house in these troubled days. The Spirit is moving in mysterious ways. Reminded when old doubts appear that perfect love casts out all fear. In thanks I tend the garden here on the way, on the way. my Father's house.
It's sobering and moving to hear people talk so openly about their lives. It's not often we open up to others like that. I think of Noel looking for some reason, some basis to believe. Or Chuck, driven to prove how good he was, but never satisfied. Or Kathy, waking up in a nightmare marriage. Each one, Tom, Katrina, Bob, myself, all very different people. Yet we all had the same need. We needed to know where we could really place our trust and where truth and lasting love could really be found. What about you? Have you found that anchor in your life? That place of trust and truth and love? Or are you still looking? You know, none of us can make another's decision for them. All we can really do is share our experience and point in a direction. Thank goodness it's not all up to us. God's taken action on our behalf, and He knows you and your needs intimately. And that's who's calling your name right now. Not me, not Ralph Martin, or any other human being, but God Himself. He loves you. He's calling you by name. He's inviting you to come home. You know, there may be also some of you who are watching and you're familiar with the words of Jesus and you're going to church faithfully, but it seems like you're just going through the motions. I encourage you, don't give up. There's more. Jesus is there, and He's the fullness of truth and life and love, and He wants to be closer to you. In a moment, a message will follow about a booklet I've written. It's called What Happens When I Die. It's meant to give you an opportunity to reflect about what you've seen during our time together. I think it will be helpful. I hope you'll call for it. Thanks for being with us, and I wish you the very best there is, that you may know Him who has a future full of hope and love for you. Jesus.